chose that have the greatest potential for energy savings in the near future. And just quickly wrap up with conclusions and the future recommendations based on our project findings. Okay, so basically, as you all may know, this project was centralized on researching and analyzing commercial food service technologies, mainly highly efficient emerging gas commercial food service technologies. Obviously, this is the Gas Emerging Technology Program. So the overall goal to be able to achieve this was to gather program participation data and also current market data on energy efficient commercial food service technologies to get an understanding of the current market saturation and the current energy efficiency program uptake of these different technologies to be able to provide actionable recommendations for future projects for the GET program. So this project looked at all commercial food service related measures. And after analyzing the historical trends, there were 4 high priority technologies that showed the greatest potential, and we'll go into detail into that. And those 4 are griddles, number 2, under fire broilers, which are basically grills in a commercial setting. Number 3 is an automatic conveyor broiler, and then a number 4 actually is steam tables. And it so happens that steam tables has no record of measure uptake for this technology. And so based on CPUC recommendations, we gathered additional information to help establish or support a measure package development on gas-fired steam tables specifically. All right, so based on just cutting to the chase on the major project findings that we found after reviewing the market status, the market barriers, and the saturation, the current market saturation of these different technologies, high priority technologies, we found at number 1 that there is potential for a griddle tier 1, tier 2 measure package revision. So basically the current latest technology of griddles in the field are extremely efficient compared to the measure requirements. So there is ample data available, cost, performance, such as that, to be able to support the measure package. So we found that griddle has a great opportunity there for a measure package update. The same was found for under fire broilers, as there were very highly efficient models that were available onto the industry today, but there were a very limited amount of cost data for those newer higher end models. So that's something that needs to be further clarified. Among those, so we've also identified several non-energy efficiency benefits as market drivers. So anything that has to do with, say, operational ergonomics or production, anything that the highly efficient upgraded technology would help them, that is aside from the energy efficiency benefits. And there was quite a few that were acting as strong drivers that we identified through this study. Another were that complex controls were found as a market barrier. So a lot of the times when you're upgrading to these new energy efficient technologies, the controls will be pretty much the same. But for some of the technologies, such as combination ovens, which use a combination of steam and convection, can be quite complicated to the point of programming, basically doing a computer program just to get a recipe sorted out. So that was found as one of a strong market barrier that wasn't identified at the beginning of this project. Another key finding was that under-fired broilers and griddles were found to be alternatives to conveyor broilers. So a lot of the times, customers would stick to using under-fired broilers, even though they're a lot less efficient to achieve the same goal as, say, a conveyor broiler cooking, say, burgers, which is most commonly used for that. So there was a huge opportunity for the customers that were using griddles and broilers to use conveyor broilers to be more efficient and more to optimize operations. Also, in regards to steam tables, we found that there were a large variation in existing steam table market, and that the operating hours were similar to prior reports. So there still needs to be a lot of extra work to be done to be able to characterize the steam table market and able to do a measure package development in that area. Great. So based on these major findings, the key project recommendations that we concluded from this study were that there's a huge opportunity, once again, for a tier 1, tier 2 measure package revision for griddles, which we believe would really promote adoption among those who use it. And then it'd be a great opportunity, as we'll see, due to the number of equipment out there, that there's a huge opportunity for energy savings based on higher tier revisions. Also, we recommend that based on the several non-energy efficiency benefits that we found through this study, that the future studies should be conducted to further quantify and validate those, and see how more dependent are those factors on the decision makers of upgrading to these energy efficient equipment. So that's going to be interesting to see how much more work could be done for there. Also, we found that there is an opportunity to be able to compare the energy use, as in the energy input to the equipment, and actually correlating that directly to the cost of cooking different types of foods. So if there were some type of calculation that say an operator could use to say, if I'm cooking this type of food, will I actually benefit from using a more optimized energy efficient equipment? So giving them actual quantitative results would be very beneficial in helping promote these adoption. And lastly, obviously, as I said before, there's a need for a separate steam table market assessment, as there was a variety or various variations in between the different type of steam tables and the different type of applications for the steam tables. So now we're just going to go over the tasks and the kind of chronological order of how this project was commenced. Obviously, there was a project initiation meeting, but more importantly, the project began with the in-depth market barrier literature research to get an idea of what the current known market barriers and advantages and disadvantages are of, and conceptions and misconceptions of using energy efficient equipment, as it was initially thought that there's a notion that energy efficient equipment will decrease production or decrease the quality of your food. So those were the types of questions that were sought to be answered in this kind of a study. Is, do energy efficiency equipment actually do hinder performance? Does it reduce output? Does it make things harder for employees, or just different types of market barriers? So based on that literature review, the third task was to be able to select the high priority energy efficiency commercial food service measures based off of what we think are the more apparent barriers and things that could be easily addressed. Based on that, kind of together was step number 4, which was to develop the measure offering recommendations for the energy efficient steam tables, based on the lack of information that's available to be able to establish energy savings for the variety of steam tables that are found in the market chains that we were looking at. So then task number 5 was, based on those selected high priority measures, was to determine what the market potential would be. And then lastly was to do a series of interviews with subject matter experts, number 6, and then number 7 with customers who actually have been using these energy efficient equipment, to get an idea of what the real world problems and market barriers are. Great. So a little motivation and background to why this has been selected as a GET project. As I mentioned before, I've worked over 8+ years as a cook behind the grill, behind the oven. It was never in the mind of the operators of gas consumption and saving energy. So this becomes quite apparent why this is one of the highest natural gas energy uses. Aside from, I think it's just behind a 2021 PG program potentials and goal study, where the incremental achievable potential was just behind water heating, and even more than HVAC measures. So you could see water heating, commercial food service, and HVAC are all huge potentials for saving energy. Another background and motivation among the savings was, since this study was conducted at the tail end of 2022, we wanted to be able to quantify and reveal some growing trends that were happening because of the COVID-19 pandemic. Specifically, there was a bit of a trend for kitchens to consolidate their operations due to online ordering, staff shortages, increased food prices. And interestingly enough, these were all effects of pandemics that we were not aware that were going to be lasting effects. But as you may all know now, a lot of these effects are things that are set in stone. So a lot of the things that were revealed in this study are trends that are actually being seen today, even though the pandemic is technically over. So it was interesting to see that as well and try to quantify those effects. And so the first major task of this, again, was to do a market literature overview to get an idea of where the market saturation was. And there were a few key studies, but as you can see from the plots to the right-hand side, for different types of equipments, you can see easily that the SFSR fast casual dining is among the highest in all, even compared to quick serve restaurant, which is fast food, the first three categories. So basically, you could see that there's a large opportunity for potential savings within the fast serve restaurant casual dining market sector. So there was also, it's also key to note, there was an Energy Star study that was explored that revealed that most likely the national chains decisions for upgrading to energy efficient equipment was most likely based on first costs rather than life cycle costs, and that franchisees are not required to use corporate equipment specifications. So for the national chains, they really aren't looking at the long term, but really just the short term, as you might know, that these industries are pretty volatile. So it's really hard for them to look into the long term unless it's a large corporation doing a huge investment up front. But doing upgrades for the long-term investment is something that they really weren't taking into consideration, just the first upfront cost. Also, since franchisees were not really required to use corporate equipment specifications, this kind of allowed for flexibility in what kind of equipment they could use to be able to meet those recipe guidelines. So there's definitely an opportunity there for to influence corporate decisions to make their franchisees to use these more energy efficient specifications. So also, an additional study was explored to look at the distributions of the various different restaurants in LA County, specifically just Los Angeles County, to verify the amount of independent operators versus large chains. So it was found that about 62% were independently owned. How about only 5.7% of those independently owned were fast casual dinings, while 21% of those were large chains that are fast casual dining. So if this holds true throughout California, the number of gas appliances in the large chains significantly outnumbers the number of that in independently owned. So with that being the manufacturer's focus on large chains, with their more highly efficient, cutting edge technologies, really not focusing on the significant portion of independent restaurants that are also out there that have an opportunity. So that was kind of the market status that was established through these studies. Okay, so the market studies were kind of broken out into the market barrier literature overview was broken out to the market studies that we talked about. Then also there were tech studies that were shortlisted based on available information. So based on a PG&E study from 2012, we found that the griddles provide customers with benefits of multi-zone surfaces. So basically, you can control multi-zone temperatures to be able to cook multiple foods, basically, instead of using multiple griddles, you can use one griddle with multiple zones. Also from the CEE program guide in 2015, it was found that the convection ovens allow for faster cook times and allow for consolidating kitchen operations, as you can you can offer additional items on the menu based on convective versus conventional cooking, oven cooking, and also resulted in faster cooking times. As for the steam cookers, there were two relevant studies basically indicating that they had performance and reliability problems, and that their incremental cost is negative, since those steam cookers actually boil less food than the conventional ones. Steam tables, there was an SEG and SDG&E combined study that showed a great potential, and again, that about 70% of the steam tables in the market are highly inefficient, but there just, again, lacks the data to be able to establish the measure package. So that's something that we try to address here. And lastly, a 2015 CEE program guide was used for rack ovens to assess rack ovens, but that showed that the rack ovens have an incremental cost of around $9,000. So that's something that restaurant equipment selection decision makers really are not going to do, unless that is the incremental cost of that at that level would take a very long time for them to pay off. So it's not something that they would really consider. It was not considered for this study. Okay, so the next task was to be able to isolate these high priority measures and get an idea of which programs have the highest rebates claimed in the last few years. So basically, there's no obvious energy efficiency technology advancements in the kitchen that would be candidates for future studying. So we basically just focused on existing measure packages, and obviously those measure packages are just going to build upon the same technology that people are using in the commercial food industry, and it's not much is really going to change from that. So based on the selection of the three existing measures, it was based on basically historical participation data, feedback from SoCal gas interviews, SoCal representatives, and also measure cost comparisons. So we basically, the plot to the right shows the statewide yearly claims for different of the top performing highest yearly net therm commercial food service programs from 2017 to 2021. And as you can see, obviously in 2020, when the pandemic hit, obviously the top performing COM instant rebates food service POS program obviously goes completely down. So that was considered the effects of the pandemic, obviously. But we can see that this being an actual SoCal Gas midstream program was the largest program to receive rebates. So, and also SoCal Gas indicated this program is now a statewide midstream program run by a third-party implementer. So the same was done. So basically, we indicated that there's a high potential for these different measure packages that are listed here: convention, combination, griddle, steamer, convection, conveyor, automatic, and under fire broiler, based on the claims data that we were looking at. Yeah. So based on the statewide, the program level and the measure level data analysis that we did, obviously we selected these three first high priority technologies and the fourth steam tables due to the reason that we explained before. But the table 6 over to the right kind of shows you the summary of our statewide yearly claims analysis. So just summarizing all the claim savings, all the net savings, and all the TRCs and projects that were under these different priority technologies. We see that obviously automatic conveyor broiler has an extremely high TRC and TSB. The net savings is not very high, so there's a huge opportunity there. We also see that the TRC is actually pretty good for 2.34 under fire broiler, and the TRC is still pretty good for a griddle, but we'll see in a later slide why griddles were considered the top priority, even though they're not at the same metrics as the other technologies. So among those 3 high priority technologies, we again, based on CP recommendations and the potential that's been identified for the savings specifically for gas, dry and wet well steam tables, basically operating with water or without water. The CPU recommendations include defining key operation parameters to determine market share statistics, to conduct additional field monitoring, develop standards, testing protocols, industry standards, and basically revising saving calcs, developing a stable model, and then submitting a measure package in itself. So basically, that was something that we tried to do and quantify an additional to those 3 existing measure packages. So after the high priority technologies were identified, we wanted to be able to identify what the market potential was for these. And here you'll see why the griddle was selected as one of the top performers. We could see market size as a number of units, and this considers, again, all yearly claims. So it could be restaurant chains, independent owners, it could be anything. But based on those claims, obviously 47, almost 50,000 griddles shows a huge potential for to be able to upgrade these to energy efficient. But we need to be able to address these market barriers, because obviously the low market penetration value indicates that there are barriers that we're not addressing, and that this is what the study was aiming to do. So basically, yeah, so the very high therm savings possible for each of these high priority technologies, even though there's a low market penetration, shows and kind of backs up the idea of why we selected these as a high priority. I'm sorry, is there a question? Okay. So now to the actual interviews. Now that we did our analysis, we identified what would be the best potential technologies. We wanted to get out there and ask subject matter experts, and also the customers who were using these, what their idea were of why these technologies aren't being adopted as much as they should be, and just get a general census of why and why not these technologies would be upgraded to more energy efficient models. So the first task, number 6, was focusing on the actual manufacturers, technical reps, distributors, those experts in the field that are have a really good idea of the market share and why the energy efficient models are not being adopted the way they should. So our experts were recruited from 3 different sources, basically the Cal Foodservice Instant Rebates Program Equipment Contact List. So the any of the qualified equipment that were on there, all the manufacturers were reached out to. There were statewide midstream food service program utility reps, but also prior relationships with through the program that we were able to establish relations with, to be able to ask them a series of questions, basically. Very, very straightforward, quantifiable questions where we asked an equal amount of 17 driver questions and 17 barrier questions to quantify what we could see as the market drivers and barriers for these specific technologies, specifically for the high priority technologies, so we can get an idea to provide recommendable actions for these technologies in the future. Now, one of the most valuable parts of this project was actually being able to quantify these market drivers and barriers. So based on the survey structure that we provided, we were able to actually rate these and rank them into the highest and lowest barriers, market and drivers barriers. So based on what we found as the highest market barriers, as you might already assume, was a high initial cost. These energy efficient technologies obviously are very expensive. Um, so that was one of the main factors that we found when interviewing everybody, is that they were very quick to say that the high initial costs were one of the largest things. The next top barrier at the time that this study was being conducted was that the supply chain issues due to the pandemic. So a lot of the people that we spoke with uh, didn't express concerns with very long lead times to get these newer, highly efficient models, which typically manufacturers or distributors didn't keep in stock. A lot of times, manufacturers would keep in stock their low industry standard energy efficient models, since those are the bulk sales, right? So if you would want to order a highly efficient one of the brand new models, it typically takes a while. It's not off the shelf. So we found that a lot of the large chains had an advantage in this regard, seeing that they actually were able to work directly with manufacturers to get these reduced lead times. So obviously working directly with them and setting up upgrades, and that was the best way to reduce the lead times. And obviously, if something's going to take a year to get there, they're not going to decide to do it, even if it's energy efficient. Being that the restaurant commercial food service industry is very volatile. Um, the third market barrier is lack of awareness amongst customers for the energy efficient equipment. So we found that a lot of the customers were generally making their decisions based on a short-term ROI, and we're not basically taking into account the long-term benefits. Um, they are aware that these are very efficient technologies, but they are not aware that how these will pay back over time, and the different non-energy efficiency benefits that will come around, that will come with the new upgraded equipment. So, but among those barriers, we found three really outstanding market drivers for those that would want to upgrade to energy efficient. Whoever the decision maker would be that would be the regional manager for a large chain, or an independent owner, a chef, whoever was the actual decision maker. So obviously the biggest driver was improved performance. They want product that can produce the quality product with the same taste that their customers are familiar with, and they want it fast. Nobody wants to wait for the food. So, but they don't want to suffice the quality of the food for increased savings, if that makes sense. So they really want to see improved performance in terms of quality of product and customer satisfaction in the long run. Um, and also, a lot of the big driver we saw with these upgraded technologies, be that it be a self-cleaning oven, or just an improved technology on, say, a griddle that makes it easier to maintain. It reduces the labor costs. And as you may know, labor costs are a huge factor in restaurant, commercial food service, especially working as a chef. That was probably the number one factor taking into consideration when making managers' decisions and financial decisions for the restaurant or the company, is just where you are at labor and how you can manage labor. So being able to reduce labor times and improving performance is obviously huge drivers for these. Um, and then also considering consolidation of kitchen operations. So this is taking into consideration during the pandemic, when a lot of places were shutting down, and a lot of the, say, large chains were consolidating to a single location, or creating a centralized location for online orders or whatever it may be. But when they're able to consolidate, they would generally opt for the energy efficient, very space minimal commercial food service equipment. And obviously, since they're planning for it, they're able to uh, be able to plan the upfront costs and then consolidate everything into a small kitchen, and then you can produce incredible output. So consolidating kitchen operations was a big thing for, and this is in terms of the subject matter experts too. So the next slide will kind of give you a little overview of the different type of what we'd like to call them SMEs, subject matter experts, based on the different types of manufacturers and distributors. And then,
Chris, could I ask a question? I apologize for interrupting
Sure.
you. By the way, very informative presentation. Thank you so much for sharing the information. I'm just curious to ask, during your interview session, did you come across any of the interviewers concerned about upcoming regulations, whether about zero GHG emissions or the zero NOx emissions, and what this could impact in terms of the considered impact on high initial costs or supply chain, all of that? I just wonder if this has any interaction here.
Yes, yeah, that's a great question. We definitely took that into consideration in our interviews, and it was something that we thought was going to be a driver or barrier, but it turns out a lot of the time the interviewees were really not concerned with it. Most were aware, but it really wasn't a driving, deciding factor in why they would or would not upgrade to these equipment. So there were a few interviewees that brought up the notion that it's great to be green, save energy, but at the end of the day, they really are just worried about the dollars and the energy savings and operations. I feel like in that sense there could be more outreach in that sense that that there isn't enough awareness on the effect of GHG, or there's not enough benefits being conveyed to this specific industry, or whatever it may be. But to answer your question, it's basically a lot of them really, they know what it is, but they really just don't care. That was the kind of the response that we got from it. But it was definitely included, as a good chunk of the questions were included, to try to aim at seeing if that was a decision-making factor in that process. I hope that answers your question. Cool. Okay. So I assume that answered his question. So again, we just kind of wanted to break it out into the different types of SMEs, so manufacturers, distributors, then also technical experts and utility reps, to see if there's kind of a difference between the barriers and drivers. So we did find, obviously, the barriers for both of them high initial costs, but in terms of manufacturers was the supply chain issues and lack of awareness. But when you speak in terms of the technical experts and the utility reps, they found that a large barrier was the added maintenance associated with these newer technologies. So obviously, if you've ever worked in a kitchen before, things usually have to be cleaned and maintained almost daily. So having your staff, having your kitchen staff being able to be able to allot time out of the night for a very complex conveyor broiler, to be able to break it apart, clean it up, and all that stuff, and be able to know how to do it without breaking it, serves as a very large market barrier. So again, this ties back to the labor costs, really. And as for the drivers, we could see that there is a bit of a difference in between. You can see that the manufacturers, distributors think that consolidating kitchen operations performance is key, but also there's a driver of dry versus wet well steam tables. So if you're not familiar, basically a dry well will just use convection air, and it rids the need of water and makes components a lot easier. So they're seeing a lot of shift towards gas dry well steam tables. But as in the perspective of the technical experts, the major drivers were the labor savings, which is obviously associated with the added maintenance that were identified by this group, and then also the easy installations. So this is in regards to a plug and play application, in terms of like tabletop griddles, tabletop appliances, where you can just swap in and out. If something's going to require a huge retrofit, then that's going to make it a huge barrier. But if it's easy to install, it's energy efficient, and you could show that it's going to save money, then they're going to be pretty quick to opt to it. that option. And now we can move to the actual customer interview. So aside from interviewing the industry professionals that were selling and distributing the actual equipment, we wanted to get a firsthand recollection from the people that were actually using it. So this could be the actual operators, the independent operators, the owners. It could be the managers. It could be corporate corporate and territorial managers that that govern the whole western coast of some like Burger King or whatever it may be. So it really just tried to really focus on whoever the decision maker was at the end of the day. Obviously, the people that the cooks, the operators that are using these technologies really are not. They're really not keeping in mind, you know, if the burner's running all day. They really don't mind. They're just focusing on getting their job done. So we are just focusing on who is the decision maker and how are they and how much influence do they have on this actual upgrading to more energy efficient technologies. So the customer feedback was collected from a variety of, mostly from SoCal gas customers, obviously, to get an idea of those who use the actual service from SoCal Gas. But there were a total of 30 interviews conducted for this task 7 and 8, which was combined. Um, it's important to note that when this was being conducted during the pandemic, it was especially hard to get participants in these interviews, so to speak, since a lot of the commercial food service and restaurant managers were focusing on just keeping operations afloat. So we did get 24 interviews that were focused solely on those high priority technologies. And then we did 6 separate that were just geared specifically towards the steam tables. But again, what we tried to do is we tried to quantify the different market drivers and barriers that we thought were most prevalent, and to be able to use that information to be able to provide actionable recommendations. So then we can move on to the actual disadvantages and advantages and disadvantages of the different selected high priority technologies, and kind of go into more depth if you're not too familiar with these technologies. So number one is the conveyor broiler. Basically, typically this is used for burger patties. Anything you can slide in at the top and it'll come in around the bottom. So it's basically a self-contained unit. So what we found from our interviews is that the advantages obviously were the automation and the increased food production output from these. So these self-contained units, you just pop in whatever you need, either it's toasting or whatever it may be, and you could walk away and come back and it's ready. So it's obviously, there's huge benefits there. It saves energy on utility bills, obviously, since you're doing precise cooking on it, and you could program these things to be able to tell it to get each side to a specific cooking quality, which is ideal for some situations. So with that, there's very few issues with operations. So once everything's set up, typically it's very easy to operate and you don't have to do very much as an operator. But also another key advantage that we found from these conveyor broilers was less heat radiation into the kitchen, since they're, as we mentioned before, the under fire broilers and different type of broilers will be used for the same thing. Those are open and exposed to the kitchen with a hood vent over, obviously, but those aren't basically self-contained, so the kitchen gets very warm, and you have to consider the ergonomics that go into the operators that are standing right next to it, comfort, and all those things. And if it's an open kitchen, obviously the comfort of the customers. So it really depends on what type of kitchen that you have to be able to consider. Obviously, these are very compact, so it's a consolidation of space, as mentioned before. But there's also disadvantages, as we mentioned before, with this technology, was the added maintenance. These things have complex like tracks and what do they call it, conveyor systems that you have to break apart and take apart and clean almost every night to maintain your product and obviously food safety regulations. So that's a big thing. Also, for these types of conveyor boilers, the programming can be a little advanced for, say, an average operator at that level. So improper operation is a huge disadvantage. A lot of people won't know how to change it from toasting bread to cooking a burger patty, for instance. Um, but then also we found as a huge disadvantage for these very complex type of machines is the long lead time for replacement parts. Now, again, this was done during COVID, so everything had a long lead time. So it would be interesting to see if those manufacturers have been able to address these long lead times for these replacement parts. My guess is that has not been addressed since a lot of the pandemic effects have seemed to spill over and linger. So, if one little part breaks on that conveyor boiler, then you're down and you can't use it, and you got to get that thing fixed immediately. So, and a lot of times at that point, they'll fix it whichever way they can on site, and obviously that's going to lead to a very energy inefficient operation. So these are huge disadvantages to consider when trying to promote the adoption of a conveyor boiler, which can obviously benefit energy savings in certain situations, obviously. So on to the next would be the griddles. So very many of you are familiar with the griddles that are used typically for any flat top type of cooking. It could be, a lot of times these are found in breakfast locations, IHOPs, Denny's, stuff like that, where it's large quantities of buffet style cookings. So the advantages we found with these very highly efficient, this example here is a tabletop griddle, multi-zone griddle. So each of those thermostats can control each of those zones at a different temperature. So then you can the cook could be, or the chef could be more creative. They could use smaller, more efficient designs. They can get more uniform temperatures on their product. Their faster cooking times. These smaller, more ergonomic designs are made for operators. For instance, at the back end of this is a splash guard. Something as simple as that can make the life really easy for operators. So for these energy efficient technologies to be able to include these small non-energy efficient benefits, these ergonomic factors, these splash guards, these little things that make the life of the operator easier, these little tiny things makes a huge effect at the end of the day. Because if you're using this machine thousands and thousands of times over and over, and those little things add up, the labor costs will eventually really start to add up, and upgrading to these equipments would really seem very feasible at that point. But lastly, I'd like to point out for these griddles is there's increased reliability. With that being that since there's multiple zones being fired, if one fails, then you got redundancies. So a lot of times conventional griddles only have one or two, maybe one or two sides, and they're basically connected together to keep it all in the same zone. If that fails, then you're down, and then obviously you're out of production, and that's not good news. So the increased reliability that these multi-zone griddles provided was all found as a huge advantage for those that were aware of these things. Again, as we said, the lack of customer awareness is a big thing, that they don't know these kind of small ergonomic factors or reliability issues that would help you that would reduce downtime ultimately, because reducing downtime in food service, obviously that's the whole key in maintaining quality. So these are all the small little things. So the only disadvantage we did find with griddles was that there were sometimes these griddles would come into smaller griddle sizes, which may decrease food output production based on space limitations in your kitchen. But obviously, if you were to take into all the advantages into consideration, you can obviously avoid this disadvantage. So it's just something that a lot of customers were worried about. They think that these griddles, they're more efficient, great, but they're usually smaller to be more efficient. But that's actually not always the case. So there's that misconception that and more energy efficient equipment reduces your food output since it's going to be using less energy to be more efficient. And that's the misconception that was found throughout the interviews for these different types of equipments. And the goal of this, obviously, is to inform them that that is not the case. That upgrading to an energy efficient will save you money and also increase your output and maintain food quality. So that would be a huge driver for them. So the next and final of the three high priority technologies that we selected based just off of the net energy savings and the market saturation was the under fire broiler. Most of you might know this as basically it's a grill. It's a grill inside of a kitchen. A lot of people don't know them as broilers, obviously, but it was found specifically for these new Synergy Garlands type of under fire broilers, these tabletop broilers, that they're extremely efficient and have incredibly high quality performance compared to conventional, and also these are multi-zone broilers as well, but they are mostly multi-zone. But the problem is when we did our research on the availability, the market availability, the cost data availability was very limited on these, specifically the Synergy Garland brand. It was just these that were very, very efficient compared to others. So we would like to see that there could be in the future more information that's gathered to be able to support a measure package development for these very, very high, performing under fire broilers. So these were these specific Synergy Garland were a little hard to find in industry. So we did find a few and talked to them and found that the advantages and disadvantages. And what we found was that they actually are very high quality performance, when even though a lot of people think that the under fire broiler is just a lot of flame coming from underneath, and if you make it more efficient, it's not going to be better for operations. But actually it was found that it was very high quality, being that the burners are more self-directing in the heat in itself. So instead of wasting the heat into the kitchen, it's directing the heat into your food, which allows you to control the quality of the food, increase uniform cooking. But one thing we did find with this is the disadvantages is that it has a little bit of a slower cooking time, and starting the operations in the morning, usually when you get there, you have to start ovens and everything else about an hour, 30 minutes before you even open, so that when the first customers come in, you're ready to go. So there was a little bit of a concern with that. These do take a little bit more to go, but obviously if you're accounting for that in your operations, then it shouldn't be a problem. So then that comes to the next one, that there's improper operations. So you need to be able to plan for these things up front. And then the last disadvantage, obviously, is that we did find a few of these models on market and they were extremely expensive. So there's a lot of work to be done here to be able to address these upfront costs, to be able to further quantify the amount of savings and do a cost benefit analysis to be able to see if upgrading to these extremely expensive, highly efficient models would be beneficial to the customer. But we believe that they would, based off of what we found. And lastly is the steam tables. Now, again, you can see over to the right, it kind of gives you an example what a dry. Basically, it's convecting air throughout a closed well system. So it's a dry well. You don't need water. It maintains a very uniform temperature. It doesn't burn the food as you may have gone to a buffet, and if it's been sitting there in the water for a while, the water evaporates and it starts to burn because it's not supposed to be designed like that. So these dry wells they don't have the problem with evaporations, and they're very highly efficient as well too. So we did find that it was a little difficult to sense the steam table. There was no program uptake, so we basically had to do cold calling and kind of reaching out and getting an idea of what the kind of steam tables are out there today. And there was kind of a big variation between like off the shelf and custom manufacturing. So say off the shelf, just buy the steam table, roll it in, you're good to go. Or versus like Panda Express, where they have to build the steam tables into the whole line. So there's a huge area for us to be able to quantify what are the costs associated with that. What are the different markets that opt for off the shelf versus custom, and then also electric versus gas. So a lot of the times we did see gas, but a lot of times we did see electric. So it was really hard to quantify between where would we see electric, where would we see gas, and if there's enough gas for us to even pursue a measure package development in itself. So it's very interesting in what we found. We believe that steam tables, there's a lot of energy being used there, and that they run typically throughout operations. So if you go to a buffet, it's running all day. So that was kind of the operational hours that we found that were from prior reports have been confirmed with these, that they're running a lot and there's not a lot of information. So based on a report, if you dig in a little more, you'll find more information about these steam table findings and recommendations for measure package developments. And lastly, we're just going to go over, I guess the project findings and conclusions, recommendations that were in the beginning of the presentation would be the conclusions and recommendations to conclude this presentation. I should have put those at the end of this presentation. My apologies, but again, just to go over it briefly, we have potentials for tier 2, tier 1 measure package developments for griddles, under fire broilers. There's been several non-energy efficient benefits for market drivers that were identified through the study, which were not identified before, and there could be a lot more that are serving as the decision-making process for the upgrading to these. There could be more work done in the complex controls. The combination ovens are very complex. They're very, very complex, but they're typically not used in the US. European markets, they dominate. And obviously, European kitchens, restaurants are very high quality. So they find these as very, very beneficial, and they love the very high quality combination ovens. But that's not something that's been seen as an adoption over here yet, but that might be something that might be coming. Obviously, we found that there's the underfire versus the conveyor, and that we can make a shift more over to conveyor. And again, there's a large variation in that steam table market, and steam table operating hours have been reported to be the same. So the recommendations, once again, if you could just go to that one last slide, the next slide over, is again to quantify further those benefits, to be able to calculate, to be able to quantify the energy use versus cooking different foods. So you could use a strategic approach. And then lastly, again, doing a separate steam table market analysis. And based on all that, that is the major findings of our project. And thank you for joining me today. If there's any questions, we'd be glad to take them. If you want to reach out to Brian with any questions via email, you could pass them along to Linkus, and we'd be more than glad to do some digging if there's anything you guys would want to know more about. But thank you very much for joining today. Thank you.
Thank you, Christopher. Looks like Dennis, you have your hand up. If you want to go off mute, that would be awesome.
Hello. I had a question about griddles in particular.
Yes.
Have you done any market analysis delineation between what percentage of griddles are thermostatic versus manually controlled?
No, that is not something we did. No, we were really just focusing on more of the decision-making factors. We didn't actually quantify how much would be thermostatic versus non-thermostatic, but that would be very interesting to find out, specifically with the griddles, being that those Garland brands were extremely efficient, but we found that a lot of the breakfast places that we interviewed with these types of equipment already have them installed, kind of installed in a large quantity. So it's really hard if they want to do a replacement, they have to replace all of them. And a lot of the times they have separate griddles so they can do the multi-zone. So they kind of have to be able to go from a style of cooking on separate griddles to cooking on the same griddle but multi-zone. So it seems like a large number is still non-multi-zone, where it seems like it's easier for the operators to be able to operate from griddle to griddle instead of zone to zone. But that's something we need to quantify to verify. But I hope that helps answer your question.
Thanks. And I know with double-sided griddles, mostly are used by chains. Are there any chains that are using? Are there any non-Energy Star double-sided griddles out there?
I don't believe so. So in terms of the double-sided griddles, we found that those are typically used for like the larger chains, McDonald's and such as that, but those require a very high upfront investment and customer training. So typically we only found that larger chains would even consider those as an option, being that they do increase output. They're a lot faster. They're uniform. But again, it was something that wasn't really a focus of this study, since that was generally used by larger chains, which already do consider, when they're doing like a new restaurant, new McDonald's, they already consider the most energy efficient equipment. So it wasn't really a target audience, so to speak, for this. So.
Well, thank you, Christopher. If we have any more questions, feel free to email us, email Brian at the email right there. And once again, yes, slides and the recording will be distributed sometime today or on Monday.
Thank you all, and thank you, Chris.
Thank you, everybody, for joining today. I was glad to share that with you.